Nice. All right. We've been exposed to a lot of interesting ideas today, and so our last speaker is going to be Bradley Kramer. He's remote as well, coming to us from. Let's start over. Oh, that's a shame. I guess you missed the shofar. Okay.
I heard the shofar.
Oh, did you hear the shofar? Okay, that's good.
Yes, it cut out after that during your intro.
I must have bumped it. Okay. So yes, Bradley Kramer coming to us from North Carolina, and Bradley has a lot of experience with the Jewish community and has written a number of books, and he's going to be talking to us today about some very interesting things in 3rd Nephi. So without further ado, Bradley Kramer.
Thank you. And Chag Sameach, Chaverim. Thank you so much for inviting me and letting me attend this conference. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I hope you can hear me all right, can you? Can you hear me all right?
Sorry, I muted it here. Yes, we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm sorry I can't be there. Members of my family have a very delicate immune system, cause them any sort of psychological worry. Before I want to begin, I want to thank Charlotte for her excellent shofar playing. I have a ram's horn shofar and some trumpet knowledge and can master one note. The very long note is a good note, but hers is quite amazing to me. Are we doing all right, Joshua? Joshua?
Everything's good. Sorry. I just have the microphone muted here on our side, but we can hear you just fine and see you well as also. So.
Okay, great. Let me see if I can start sharing my, okay, disabled participant screen sharing. This is something I need.
Let me get that for you. All right.
Okay, that looks
okay.
Let's see if I can do this now.
So see if you can do that now.
All right, just a second.
Excellent.
Are you getting the PowerPoint view or the presentation view, or can you see a column on the side?
Yeah, we have the PowerPoint view here. It's not the presentation view yet. So
it fills the whole. It fills the whole screen.
Yep. Oh, it did.
Right now?
It does now.
Okay, great.
That looks great.
Sorry about this. My offering today is called "Why is this communion different from all other communions?" Certainly a reference to the questions in Passover. It's subtitled, How Jesus' Appearance in the Book of Mormon Counters Mosaic Supersessionism in the Synoptic Gospels. This is based very much, in fact, it comes from a book I published recently called Gathered in One, How the Book of Mormon Counters Anti-Semitism in the New Testament. And that comes from a lifelong interest in Jews and Latter-day Saints that in many ways, I had a project for many years. I understood from my mission, especially, how the Book of Mormon was written to the Jews as well as to other people. And I went kind of studied why or how it was written to Jews, especially how does it address some of the problems that Judaism has had with Christianity through the years. And this book and the previous book, Beholding the Tree of Life, come out of that project. I should also say that all of this is based on, fundamentally, a tremendous respect and even love I have for the Jews these days. During my mission, all because I had taken 2 whole semesters of modern Hebrew at BYU, my mission president dubbed me his Jewish program. and gave me permission to visit synagogues, to go out of my area, to talk and discuss with Jews throughout my 2 years in Southern Florida, Miami mostly. I was not exactly a Moses to the Jews, but I learned a tremendous amount and very much enjoyed interacting with Jews, learning how varied and interesting they are, how curious they are, and they become fast friends. And this feeling has been increased in last several years. Actually, over a decade, I've been participating in Torah and Talmud classes at a local Reform synagogue, and have developed deep friendships with my Jewish friends and have great admiration for them. And because of my personal experience, believe that not only do Jews and Latter-day Saints have much in common, but they have a great deal to share and benefit from each other, that awareness in both ways. And so these are some of the bases of this presentation I'm going to give. So again, this is a paper, so I will basically read this. Few events in the New Testament promote the idea that the law of Moses has been superseded or replaced by the gospel of Jesus as forcefully as the institution of Christian communion, as it is presented in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Reenacted as it is in churches throughout the world as a regular part of their worship services, this scene shows in concrete terms just how this kind of supersessionism works. And it does so chiefly because of its Passover setting. There, before a table, much as Jesus did in the Synoptic Gospels, Christian ministers bless, break, and give bread to their congregants. And in so doing, they transform this simple food item from a remembrance of the Exodus into a memorial of Jesus' death and resurrection. The whippings, the beatings, and the cruel deaths inflicted upon the children of Israel by their Egyptian taskmasters are never mentioned, nor is the power of their divine deliverance ever discussed. Instead, worshipers, frequently sitting in pews below crucifixes, crosses, and other reminders of Jesus' trials, concentrate on his whippings and on his beatings as they remember his cruel death and contemplate his deliverance from the tomb. The same is true of the wine. Here in this context, the wine is no longer the blessed fruit of the vine, the paschal representation of all earthly blessings that God has bestowed upon his children. It has been converted, either symbolically or literally, into the blood of Jesus, into a new wine, a substance that effectively shatters the old Mosaic bottle and represents instead the bounty that awaits Jesus' followers in heaven. Just as the other New Testament books portray Sukkot and Shavuot, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke present Passover as a pointless custom, utterly emptied of its original Mosaic significance and devoid of any connection to contemporary Jewish observance. Here Jesus may indeed celebrate the feast of unleavened bread and drink the fruit of the vine, but he never discusses what these foods traditionally symbolize: the bitterness of Israel's captivity, the miracle of their deliverance, the joy they experience as God's special people, much less augment them by sampling charoset, constructing a Hillel sandwich, setting out a special goblet for Elijah, or otherwise acknowledging the ongoing significance and development of this holy day. In fact, the appearance of bread and wine in this meal seems to serve only as an opportunity for Jesus to fulfill them by transforming these supposedly hollow Jewish symbols into tokens of his soon-to-be lifeless body and spilled blood. In this way, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke solidify the supersessionist position prevalent throughout the New Testament by sacramentalizing it, by using a Passover setting in order to change an otherwise joyous festival of life into a kind of never-ending funeral service, where Jesus' death, as well as those who killed him, are continually remembered, and the superiority of his way affirmed. In other words, the Last Supper is no ultimate Seder. It is instead a seized Seder, an appropriated Seder, a Seder wrenched violently from its Mosaic context and recast as a Christian rite. The Book of Mormon, like the Synoptic Gospels, also shows Jesus instituting Christian communion among his New World followers. However, there, he does so not during Passover, but later, much later, after 50 days have passed, after the Omer has been counted, and after he has observed Shavuot. In this way, through a change of setting, the bread and wine of Christian communion are not only disconnected from Passover, but Christian communion itself has been detached from any supersessionist implications derived from such a connection, and the validity and value of these Mosaic festivals are preserved. Like Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, and Passover, Shavuot is not mentioned by name here or anywhere else in the Book of Mormon, and neither are the 7 weeks that separate it from Passover definitively presented. However, like Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, and Passover, its observance is clear in several significant ways. For one, the timing of Shavuot is consistent with Jesus' appearance according to both New Testament chronology as well as that of the Book of Mormon. John W. Welch writes, "We do not know how the Nephite ritual calendar in Bountiful related to the Israelite calendar in Jerusalem, for there had been no contact between the two for over 600 years. If one can assume, however, that the two ritual calendars had not grown too far apart, the Feast of Shavuot would have been celebrated in Bountiful a few months after the Passover crucifixion and shortly after the best-known ascension of Jesus from Jerusalem reported in Acts. Such a scenario would thus make good sense of the reference in 3 Nephi 10:18 to Christ appearing in Bountiful soon after his ascension. Secondly, what is done during Shavuot dovetails with what the Nephites were doing immediately before Jesus' appearance in the Book of Mormon. During this holy day, all Israel is commanded to come before the Lord and offer up thanks for the blessings they have received, regardless of the size or number of those blessings. It is significant, therefore, that not only had a great multitude gathered together round about the temple at that time, but that this multitude was marveling and wondering one with another, showing one to another the great and marvelous change that had taken place. Such an upbeat reaction in the face of terrible storms, earthquakes, tidal waves, and other natural catastrophes suggests two things. First, that enough time had passed for the Nephites to begin to repair some of the damage caused by these events. And second, that there was some religious reason for their reaction, perhaps a special occasion or holy day, which challenged their perspective and encouraged them to put this disaster into a more positive context. Thirdly, what Jesus says after he descends out of heaven, much like Moses coming down from Sinai, corresponds to what is traditionally said on Shavuot. At this time, he does not deliver a speech consoling the Nephites or congratulating them on their restorative efforts. Instead, he offers instructions that emphasize the necessity of their obeying God's commandments with increased devotion, and he does so that they can be an example to the world. One of the main purposes of Shavuot, according to the Talmudic rabbis, is to commemorate the giving of the law to Moses on Sinai, and to recreate as much as possible the time when all Israel committed themselves to obey it. As Rabbi Irving Greenberg writes, on Shavuot, only one reading could satisfy the liturgy of reenactment, namely the account of Sinai in the text of the Ten Commandments. As he explains, on that day in Jewish places of worship, the account of the encampment at Sinai is read, Again, Israel stands as one before its maker. Again, the people are told, if you will hearken to my voice and observe my covenant, you shall be my treasured people among the nations. You shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy people to me. And again, the people answer together, all that the Lord said we shall do. Again, the mountain shakes, and the world is riven by eternal revelation. The 10 Commandments are chanted, and when they are read, the entire congregation rises to stand in awe, as if it were once again hearing the voice at Sinai. Jesus' insistence in his sermon at the temple that the Nephites avoid all thoughts and impulses that could lead them to their breaking the 10 Commandments is therefore consistent with Shavuot, as is his call for them to become the salvific salt of the earth, to serve as the light of this people, and even to be perfect, even as I or your Father in heaven is perfect. Rather than replacing the Torah, Jesus here seems to be recreating how it was given and intensifying how it should be followed, all so that these New World Israelites may have another Sinai experience and pledge themselves to God once more. No wonder Jesus' Nephite and Lamanite hearers cry Hosanna when he appears to them and bless the name of the Most High God. Blood sacrifices may have ended, and burnt offerings may have, at least this Mosaic festival is not spiritually hollow, nor is it incapable of supplying new insights, supporting fresh perspectives, and generally enhancing the religious experience of those who observe it in an ever-expanding, ongoing way. Fourthly, what Jesus does at this time similarly syncs up with Shavuot. Although one of the primary purposes of this holy day, at least since the Talmudic period, is to commemorate God's giving of his law to Israel at Sinai, Shavuot also serves as a harvest festival, when, according to Leviticus, the first fruits of the newly gathered in wheat harvest are offered to the Lord in the form of 2 special loaves of bread. Drink offerings are also brought forth, and together these food items are then consumed by those celebrating this festival. Like Sukkot, Shavuot is an upbeat Thanksgiving festival, a feast where the gifts of God are enjoyed gratefully, regardless of their quality or abundance. It is therefore telling that the bread and wine Jesus requested in 3 Nephi 18 are apparently close at hand, and that after these food items were brought forth, blessed, and shared with those in attendance, the Book of Mormon reports that the people were filled, language identical to that used in the non-sacramental feedings of the 5,000 and the 4,000 in the Gospel of Matthew. Certainly, to many New Testament influenced readers, this important meal may seem closely connected to the institution of Christian communion as it is presented in the Synoptic Gospels. After all, here in the New World, Jesus appears to act much as he did in the Old, instructing that the bread should be eaten in remembrance of his broken body, and stipulating that the wine should be drunk in commemoration of his spilled blood. However, this connection is not as close as it may seem. A careful reading of 3 Nephi 18 shows that Jesus is not starting a new ritual at this time. He is instead using the established rituals of Shavuot to show what he will do later on. Here in this chapter, Jesus employs the future tense instead of the present when he describes communion. After his followers have eaten the bread, he tells them, "This shall ye do in remembrance of my body, which I have shown unto you." And after they had partaken of the wine, he explains, "This shall ye do to those who repent and are baptized in my name, and ye shall do it in remembrance of my blood, which I have shed for you." Finally, concerning the overall effect of these actions, he states, And if you do always remember me, ye shall have my spirit to be with you." In other words, Rather than replacing a Jewish holy day with a new Christian law, Jesus is celebrating Shavuot in accordance with an old Mosaic law. However, as he does so, he uses the elements of this festival in order to prepare his followers for a new non-Mosaic ritual he will institute later on. And this makes sense. After all, the Nephites have not yet been baptized, a requirement for participation in communion, nor have his disciples been authorized to administer baptism. Therefore, it is significant that here in this chapter, when both Jesus' disciples as well as the multitude had partaken of the bread and wine, they are filled, but not yet with the Holy Spirit. Christian communion, with all of its spiritual benefits and blessings, has not yet been given. It has only been introduced conceptually in the context of Shavuot, a festival that appropriately emphasizes remembrance and gratitude and joy. In other words, Jesus does not institute the sacrament of Christian communion during the first day of his visit to the Nephites. That comes during the following day, the second day, after his disciples have ministered unto the people, after Nephi has been authorized to baptize all those whom Jesus had chosen, and after the Holy Ghost has fallen upon them. It was on this day, then, after all these things have occurred, that Jesus miraculously produces bread and wine, blesses them, and gives them first to his disciples and then to the multitude. And as he does so, he uses the present tense. As Jesus declares, "He that eateth this bread eateth of my body to his soul, and he that drinketh of this wine drinketh of my blood to his soul." And perhaps most significantly, after they do these things, the multitude is filled with the Spirit, just as Jesus promised. Given the high drama of this important event, as well as the grammatical tense Jesus uses, it seems clear to me that in the Book of Mormon, Christian communion was not instituted on Passover or on Shavuot. It was instituted later, by itself, without any ritual connection to either of these Mosaic festivals. And this is significant. It means that the spiritual utility and viability of Passover and Shavuot remain intact. The bread and wine used to institute communion were produced, not from a Seder table, nor from the first fruits offering, but from Jesus himself, by himself, seemingly out of the air. These sacramental emblems are therefore new creations, much like communion itself, and consequently, it and the Mosaic festivals exist symbolically as well as practically, side by side, as separate religious rituals, each sharing helpful and enlightening connections, but without any sense of competition or contention. As a result, then, Passover and communion can be celebrated individually by themselves, effectively and reverentially, just as Jesus did in the New World, without one superseding or replacing the other. It should be noted that such a resetting of the institution of communion in the Book of Mormon in no way undermines the authority or the reliability of the New Testament. In fact, the Book of Mormon not only supports the New Testament by affirming that Jesus' death did indeed occur during Nisan, in the first month, the same month when Passover is traditionally celebrated, but it reinforces that context by reenacting the original event this festival commemorates in a new and original way. By the time of Jesus' death, most Nephites had become not so much an oppressed people as an oppressive people. Like the Egyptians of Exodus, they had built many cities and repaired old ones. They were exceedingly rich and consequently were lifted up unto pride and boastings, even unto great persecutions of the people of God. They even entered into a covenant to destroy the people of God and to establish a king over the land, that the land should no more be at liberty. A prophet consequently came among these Nephites. Nephi, a man named after the original Nephi, who, like Moses, ministered many things unto his people, with power and with great authority. However, like Pharaoh and his courtiers, many of the Nephites were angry with Nephi because of his power. They did not believe the signs he spoke about and did harden their hearts against the Lord. As a result, there were but few righteous men among the Nephites, and consequently the majority of them were afflicted like the Egyptians, with divinely created lightning and thunder, thick darkness, and other calamities that caused them to be burned in their cities, carried away in the whirlwind, and sink into the depths of the sea, much like Pharaoh's people and his army. In other words, many of God's plagues, which are recalled during a Passover Seder, are reenacted in the Book of Mormon, and so are his blessings. Here, the faithful New World Israelites are passed over, much like their Old World ancestors. They are not buried up in the earth, drowned in the depths of the sea, burned by fire, crushed to death, or otherwise obliterated like their oppressors. They are instead delivered miraculously, mosaically, precisely because they, like the children of Israel long ago in Egypt, received the prophets and avoided all the wickedness and abominations described in the book of Exodus. In this way, the Book of Mormon verifies the New Testament's timing of Passover while disassociating it from any meaningful connection with Christian communion. Certainly, Jesus, according to the Synoptic Gospels, instituted this sacrament during a Seder in the Old World. But since he did not do so in the New, this fact is not significant. As the Book of Mormon shows, Christian communion can be instituted at any time and at any place. There is no inherent link between it and Passover. Passover was simply the meal Jesus and his disciples were eating at the time. In this way, and in others, the Book of Mormon counters not only the supersessionist elements in the New Testament pertaining to the law of Moses, but its other anti-Semitic elements as well. By changing the setting of significant events, as well as by adding a multitude of pro-Jewish statements, pro-Jewish portrayals, and pro-Jewish structuring elements to the Christian canon, the Book of Mormon puts these events in an older, larger, wider, and more Judaically positive scriptural context. And in this way, it reverses the literary tide present in the New Testament and turns it tsunami-like in a decidedly different direction. No longer are the Mosaic commandments nonsensical rules promoted by self-serving legalistic hypocrites. They instead have practical spiritual value and are observed by sincere, admirable people. In other words, within this context, the Mosaic festivals are not simply empty names, vain observances without any ancient or contemporary significance. By presenting them as truly holy days, observances consistent with ancient biblical practice, but with hints of modern additions to that practice, the Book of Mormon confirms their ongoing utility, both for Jews as well as for Christians. And it does so without changing the text of the New Testament, or otherwise undermining its scriptural reliability or authority. Since Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot are presented so vitally and vibrantly in the Book of Mormon, the fact that the New Testament does not suggests that its description of these festivals is incomplete, that it was limited to a certain time and a certain place, or that its account was abbreviated for some reason, perhaps only because time or papyrus was limited. The New Testament is therefore not wrong per se. There is simply more to these festivals than it describes, and consequently any argument requiring their replacement based solely on the New Testament is severely undermined. Why then is the institution of communion so different in the Book of Mormon? To show to the wise that there is more to the Mosaic festivals than the New Testament lets on, that when the wicked and the simple question the validity and value of Mosaic festivals, even the usually silent will have much to say. This year we are here, next year in Jerusalem. Yesterday we were slaves. Today we are free. Thank you.
I did.
Okay, I guess I get questions at this point.
Yes. Other questions? Any? See if there's any on the chat. No? Well, I have a question for you.
All right. Shoot.
So
Is this one of the 4 questions, by the way?
yes. Why? It's in common LDS thought. I think it's usually or very commonly believed that Jesus's visit to the Nephites was at Passover. You know, it was on April 6th or something, or was right after his death. I've heard people say that. Can you give us maybe some more reasons why you put this at? I know you gave some, but what would be your arguments against that in favor of a Shavuot visit?
So you're saying people in the middle of all this destruction, that very day they go down to Bountiful and go to the temple? Is that the argument?
I've heard, or maybe like the following year or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from. It just seems to fit in so well, not only with what's happening, then there seems to be a certain amount of time for them to actually recover. And why would they go to the temple? I mean, the voices said that you're not supposed to have burnt offerings or shedding of blood, but they still have a festival that they're supposed to go to the temple. So it makes sense that it would be a holiday for me. And it seems to me there's enough time to recover, and there's a certain amount of gratitude and positiveness. These uses of the words, you know, marvelous changes and things do not seem like negative. Like this is a terrible thing that's happened to our society. There's something positive going on. And that seems to me to say there's more of a connection. I've heard whispered something like they thought it was a year afterwards. I don't know the logic behind that. It seems it's much more quick. It happens much more quickly than that. But there's no firm dating of this. It's more or less just on the context.
Okay. Well, I agree with you. So very good. Okay.
You're already convinced. Thank you.
Yes, but so here's another question. Hopefully you have this handy, but the question is from Charlotte. Will you play your shofar for us? I'm sorry, I can't. I teach Institute, and I've done a series of classes involving my shofar and Jewish holidays, and it's over still at the Institute, and it's been shut down, and I haven't been over there lately to get it. So sorry. I just get one note. I am sorry. I have tried to get even one other, but it's a small ram's horn, so maybe I'm limited. But I have never heard anyone play as well as Charlotte. And I've been to synagogues where they've on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, where they have the long one, and they do this, and it's very nice, but none of the variety of the notes that Charlotte puts together. She's just amazing. It's easier with the kudu horn.
Well,
the ram's horn, yes.
They have one of those at the synagogues, and they have a very long note, but not the variety that she has.
All right. I have another question here from the audience. Can you define for us the term supersessionism for those of us who are not very familiar with its usage in this context?
Okay, supersessionism just basically means replacement. And there are at least 2 levels of this. The idea that Jesus's gospel has superseded the law of Moses, so it's a conceptual sort of thing about the way you worship. But it also goes into the idea that Christian Gentiles have superseded or replaced the Jews as the covenant people, which is certainly part of this anti-Semitic sort of thing. And there are various things in the New Testament that combine to give that impression to some people. So they believe, again, the Jews, because they've killed Jesus, according to some Christians, and have been so evil for so long, they've been rejected as God's covenant people and have been condemned to wander the earth as punishment. So there's two levels. There's a replacement of the Jews as the covenant people by Christian Gentiles, and there's the replacement of the entire law of Moses by the gospel of Jesus.
All right. Thank you.
And as a Latter-day Saint and someone who reads the Book of Mormon, I don't see that at all in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon, time and time again, as someone has mentioned, talks about how repentant Gentiles will be numbered with the house of Israel. So it's not that the house of Israel has been replaced, that the converted Gentiles will be joined with them, which is certainly consistent with the idea in the allegory of the olive tree, and that sort of thing. Incidentally, in Romans, I believe it's 9, Paul talks about a similar kind of olive tree where Gentiles are grafted into it, and Jews especially have been cut off. But he tells the Gentiles to be humble and grateful, because if it weren't for the Gentiles being Jews being cut off, there would not be room for the Gentiles to be put in. So in there's kind of like a limited number of slots in a sense, which supports the idea that the Jews have been replaced to make way for the Gentiles.
Okay. All right, I have a couple more questions for you. Says, you presented an argument against sacrament replacing the feast Feast of Passover or communion. Do you see a connection with the Last Supper, sacrament, Seder being tokens of Christ? Did I say that?
Well, in a general sense, because again, the Seder is there to commemorate the deliverance of Israel, there to be freed from physical bondage, the way Jesus is freeing people from spiritual bondage. There's also a connection that we often think of the wine or the water as remembrance of his blood in kind of a negative sense. But I've also thought about how his blood brings goodness. I mean, in the Passover version, it's the fruit of the vine. It's a representation of all the goodness and the happiness and the joy that God gives us. And I see that as connecting with the sacrament, that Jesus gives us that as well. And same with the bread. The bread is God's nourishment and gift and sustenance that we get here. And so it's not only a remembrance of Jesus, but it's a remembrance, or at least prompts us to think about the things that Jesus has given to us through his sacrifice.
So a connection for sure, but not a replacement.
Yeah, and incidentally, I got started in this with Victor Ludlow, who famously puts on several Passover Seders for his classes at BYU, and I attended one and used his Haggadah for years to put on Seders for my family, for church groups and that sort of stuff. And it was just amazing how even little kids connected with this and enjoyed it and actually looked forward to it.
I remember as a child doing Seders, and I did not always look forward to them.
Too much horseradish for you.
Yeah, horseradish, and the adults just talked for hours. And anyway, so okay.
Well, that's a shame, because the ones I've been to have been fairly short, even the Jewish ones. And I would long to go to one where we have a long discussion of what this means. So
yeah, well, yeah, that's because you're an adult. That's what someone in the audience said.
Yes,
I do have memories of it.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Okay. Is there more? Do you see more acceptance of celebrating the festivals in LDS culture? So, like, is there a trend in that direction, I guess?
Well, here I am in North Carolina. I don't know how well I can in tune with things out west and what people are saying, but there's been a large interest in Jews and in the way they celebrate things and their practices, and especially my first book deals with how Jews read the scriptures, and in a very slow interest with that. So I seem to see a lot of articles and a lot of interest in all things Judaic, and perhaps in seeing the value of these festivals for themselves too. I mean, a number of Christians see them all, again, of types of Jesus's mortal ministry, but there's a lot to them, even just from a Jewish point of view, that reveals God's will for us and his goodness and teachings.
All right, I have another question from the audience here. Regarding the Last Supper, when Christ broke bread and blessed wine, saying, "This shall ye do in remembrance," etc., was this during the Seder, or was this a separate event?
It depends on which gospel you're reading. The Synoptic Gospels, that are all based on Mark, basically have him in a Passover Seder. The Gospel of John, however, has him eat in a meal the day before, on the day of preparation. And so actually when the Passover lambs are slaughtered, that's actually, according to the Gospel of John, when Jesus is hung on the cross and killed. So he's more of in the Gospel of John, he's more of a Passover sacrifice. So the chronology is very different in these different Gospels as far as when Jesus dies and when they celebrate a meal. The Gospel of John does not portray Jesus as celebrating a Passover meal before his death or actually anywhere.
Okay. Very good. I think that's all the questions we have. Another round of applause for Bradley. Thank you.
Thanks. It must be a long day. You guys are tired out.
All right. Okay, well, that concludes our sessions for the day. I think we will close with a hymn and a prayer again. So we are going to sing hymn 84, Faith of Our Fathers. Charlotte's going to play. Hit the lights as you come by.